Nobody tells you that the honeymoon stage in every romantic relationship is designed to end. And when that happens, most couples think they've married the wrong person. Welcome to Eudaimonia, a show about what life well lived could actually look like. Today's guest is Yashodhara Lal, couples therapist and author. And she talks about exactly what happens when the romance fades, why love is hard work, and what the couples who actually do make it do differently. I know a little bit about you, but if you could just maybe introduce yourself for the audience, that would be good.
Sure. So I am Yashodhara Lal, and I am a couples therapist and a coach and an author of several books. And a big part of my identity is in my past, I have been a corporate leader. And I'm a Delhi girl. I live in Bangalore now, and I have three kids, and my husband, and of course, our dog who adopted us a few years ago. He's an integral part of the family. And yeah, I am actually on this journey to not only define myself, but also follow what I enjoy. And at the moment, what I find is that the intensity of couples therapy is something that is very attractive. It is very draining also, but it gives me a lot of joy to work with people on improving their relationships because I see how it impacts their families. So that is a special area of interest for me these days.
I was reading the book that you've written. I've just read a couple of chapters in the book, and there were several things which really stood out to me. One thing which seemed very intriguing is this reference you make to Ala the bottom of why you will marry the wrong person. It was very intriguing. If you could talk a little bit about that and the expectations versus the reality of marriages, I think that'd be a good starting point.
Yeah. When you mention Alain de Botton, what I'm actually reminded of is that he has another talk in his School of Life, which actually explains this concept of eudaimonia, which is the name of your podcast. And I
Mm-hmm.
was refreshing my memory of it, and I realized that there's a direct fit because when we talk about eudaimonia, it's actually fulfillment, and that is different
Right.
from happiness. So the main factor
Absolutely.
is that when we are pursuing something that is going to be fulfilling, it can also
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of pain involved. So our willingness to
Yeah.
accept that pain and not look at happiness on a moment to moment basis is eudaimonia. And actually,
Right.
that's what marriage is also. So the point is that a lot of problems arise in marriage because of this expectations versus reality piece, which is what Bibaton talks about in his talk. And you know, his talk is titled "Why You Will Marry the Wrong Person." I think it should be like required listening to everybody. And I wrote in my book that I wish I had heard this talk before I got married about 25 years ago, because I see often many people questioning this idea that they've
Mm-hmm.
married the wrong person, because of the problems that they're having. And essentially, what happens is it's a very, very normal thing because there are stages that each relationship is meant to go through. And this is one of the things that nobody tells us, right? That the initial stage, which is that honeymoon stage, all the romance, the chocolates and roses, walking off into the sunset, that's only stage one. And it's a very important stage because that's what gets us bonding. So nature has intended for us
Mm-hmm.
to actually mate. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
illusion and fantasy, and there are even lies that are told at that stage. We put our best foot forward as a part of this. So that's also, in a way, masking who we truly are. But inevitably, this is going to crash, right? Because reality is going to set in. And typically, this happens about a year or so of being in the relationship. And that's the second stage called differentiation. This is where
Mm-hmm.
this whole expectations versus reality becomes an issue, and people find themselves very, very disappointed and, in fact, distressed and distraught about who is this person. So one part of it is just a normal stage of development. The other part of it is, of course, that each of us bring in so much from our past, so
Mm-hmm.
many stories about how we show up in the world and how the world is supposed to be and how others are, and we bring that
Mm-hmm.
into our adult relationships. And given that we've attracted somebody into our lives who's supposed to complement our story, many of those things become self-fulfilling prophecies and problems arise. And that
Mm-hmm.
is the story of many, many marriages. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. No, I have often found myself thinking that why do Bollywood movies especially glorify just the first stage of meeting?
Yeah.
Like it's all when ev- even as youngsters, even now when you watch it, mostly majority, it's just about how amazing it is, and nobody really, like you're saying, tells you about what um it feels like once you do get married. I have known my husband for, I don't know, 10, 12 years before I got married, and suddenly I was, after getting married, I was like, how did I not see all of this?
Yeah.
So I think it's very true. And so you mentioned this phase of differentiation. If you could talk maybe a little bit more about that, what do couples go through when they are in this phase? How do they navigate this phase so as to maybe deal better with the expectations versus reality?
Yeah. So, before I get to differentiation, I just want to address what you said about Bollywood. If you really think about it, this story about, the romance is
Mm-hmm.
it's everywhere, right? It's in the books we read, it's in popular
Yeah.
culture, it's in social media now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even Hollywood. I remember reading an
Yeah.
article, I've referenced it in my book, Alexandra Solomon. She writes how Disney did us dirty. Yeah. So fairy tales, right? And I
Yeah.
wrote in my book,
Yeah.
it's not just Disney, it is also Bollywood, right? It's all reinforcing this
Right.
idea that there is
Right.
this one perfect person and then life is going to be perfect. Okay? But
Right.
what happens in the differentiation stage is inevitably one or both partners begin to realize that they rarely have compromised themselves to fit into the relationship. Okay. The
Mm-hmm.
first stage, which we call symbiosis, is one where the partners sort of suppress parts of themselves in order to fit together, yeah, and to make a
Mm-hmm.
cohesive whole. But as time passes, one or both of them realize that this is not really a satisfying way to be. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so a husband may, for example, realize that he doesn't want to spend all his free time with the wife, or the other way around,
Mm-hmm.
right? The wife
Right.
may realize that
Right.
she actually wants more freedom to do some of the things that she thought she would be okay compromising for the sake of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
As they become more honest with each other, they realize that they have a lot of significant differences, as any two human beings would. But this can be
Right.
very anxiety inducing for them because they were
Mm-hmm.
expecting something different. So what ends
Mm-hmm.
up happening is someone may make an attempt to actually be honest about what they really want, but the partner may
Mm-hmm.
react very badly, very negatively. There's actually a lot of anxiety
Mm-hmm.
underneath that negative reaction.
Mm-hmm.
They might either withdraw or they might, resentfully comply. So
Mm-hmm.
many people struggle with this because they haven't ever learned that it is natural to expect differences, nor have they learned the art of actually expressing what they really feel in a skillful way. So they may end
Mm-hmm.
up doing it resentfully, they may end up doing it angrily, they may do it passively. They may end up
Mm-hmm.
doing things that they want to do but in secret and hiding or even
Mm-hmm.
lying to the partner. Yeah.
Right.
So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is that we haven't learned to really listen with empathy to our partner. So we get
Mm-hmm.
agitated when we learn that they think differently and want to be different from us. So we
Mm-hmm.
may shut them down in different ways. Again, by either
Right.
reacting badly or sulking or playing the martyr. So people get stuck in this sort of thing at this stage of differentiation when they're not able to move on.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
typically, what I see in couples therapy, and this is part of the developmental model developed by the Couples
Mm-hmm.
Institute, we describe them as either very hostile and yet dependent on each other. So they're really enmeshed, but
Mm-hmm.
they're angry, they escalate,
Mm-hmm.
or they're conflict avoidant because they just decide that
Mm-hmm.
instead of handling conflict, they turn away from it and pretend that things are peaceful. But neither of these
Right.
types of couples experience true intimacy. So, the work of
Right.
differentiation is learning the skills of expressing oneself honestly and
Mm-hmm.
vulnerably instead of blaming the partner, but also
Mm-hmm.
holding still and listening as the partner expresses their differences from you. Yeah.
Right. Right. No, this seems like very hard work, and It's making me think of my marriage as well, and there have been so many times. Even now, I've been married 4 years now, that I find myself trying to make my husband see my point of view of a certain situation. I'm like, no, but this is what happened, and he might have a separate view of this. And it happens in a lot of cases. It could simply be sometimes about the chronology of things as well. He might say, you started this or whatever. So this gets really difficult and sometimes very ugly when I am trying to, and you feel let down because you feel like, why is this person not able to see what's happening? And there was this one talk that I came across by this psychologist called Terry Real, and he spoke about a concept which seemed very interesting again, which and he's talking exactly about this, about how couples try to get to the objective reality, which is who is right, is it you or me, versus acknowledging that there are subjective realities, that the same situation can be perceived very differently by two different people because of their life scripts. And while conceptually it's fine, but how would you sort of talk to couples who are struggling with this exact problem, which I feel is must be quite universal?
I think it is quite universal. And see, from a psychotherapy perspective, I come from the transactional analysis background. And one of the
Mm-hmm,
schools of TA is actually the constructivist school. Okay, so the idea being that there is no one reality. Okay, we all create our reality based on who we are and how we see the world, right?
mm-hmm,
And so there's absolutely truth in, I won't say absolutely because there's nothing absolute, but it is true that
mm-hmm.
there is no one objective reality, right?
Right.
And most people don't think about it that way. They get caught up in
Mm-hmm.
that position of I am right, right?
Right.
So even when you said you get disappointed because you are so desperately yearning for your husband to see it your way, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
while he insists on seeing it his way, it is a
Yeah.
very universal issue. And how,
Right.
from the perspective of couples therapy, I handle it is one of the first things I tell people is that people come into therapy to change their partner. And that does not, yeah. So they come in and they look at the therapist and they say, man, I know if you get me, then you will explain to this guy, you know, that I'm right. So it's very important for me at the very outset of couples therapy to say that that's not how it's going to work. You're not here to change your partner.
Mm-hmm.
The only person who you have any real influence over is yourself. Okay, so I
Right.
get people to agree very early on to take individual autonomous goals that have nothing to do with each other, because each person
Mm-hmm.
has something to work on in terms
Mm-hmm.
of what they want their vision to be of the relationship, and then what is it that they do that gets in their own way. So I
Mm-hmm.
constantly pull them back to their side of the street. And when it comes to
Right.
this issue of you started it, no, you started it, this is very
Mm-hmm.
common, especially in the case of conflict, because it's the way our brain works. So the
Mm-hmm.
hippocampus, which is actually responsible for memory, it actually goes offline when we're under stress, and we are in a lot of stress when we're fighting with our partner, and so
Mm-hmm.
our memory will be distorted. So it's really pointless. So I tell couples who come in and they want to dissect the fight of the week, I tell them that you can spend this whole session talking about this last week's fight, or you can actually come back to talking about how you want your relationship to be. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
helpful to talk about last week's fight because we're never going to actually
Yeah.
understand who started it, and it's quite irrelevant.
Right.
So a question I ask often is, do you want to be right or do you want to be relational? And this
Right.
gets people thinking because they don't ordinarily think about it that way. They're so caught up in that being
Right.
right. One of my favorite examples is Friends. If anybody watches Friends, they'll know that Ross insisted we were on a break. So to
Yeah.
me, and I think that line was used by the show over years. So that just shows how
Yeah.
caught we can get on our own position. Yeah, even when it's
Right.
no longer relevant. So holding up a mirror and helping couples see that, I think, is helpful.
Yeah. No, you're already alluding to it, and when I was thinking of what therapy might look like, and when I was reading your book, even one thought that sort of came to mind is, like you like you're saying, that how you're looking at a situation is so colored by your own life scripts. And like you're saying, when couples come to you and say they fix the partner, um, your own way of looking at things, the stories that you tell yourself, don't they interfere with this whole couple therapy bit,
Mm.
right? Because so how can they sort of disentangle their own perspectives and do work? I think objectively will not be the right word, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. So again, life scripts is a term from the world of TA. Okay. So Eric Berne,
Mm-hmm,
Dr. Eric Berne, who's the inventor of TA, he talked about how each of us actually have a life plan that is decided very early in childhood, basis our early experiences. Okay?
mm-hmm,
And there are contradictory views on this. So a lot of psychotherapy still believes that it does start in childhood, and a lot of our
mm-hmm,
early decisions could be made at a time when we were maybe 3 years old or 5 years old. Important
mm-hmm,
decisions about myself and how others are and how the world is. Okay, so I might decide
mm-hmm,
very early on that I'm not important here. Okay, supposing I'm a
mm-hmm,
middle child who isn't given a lot of attention,
mm-hmm,
and others are always going to be critical if that's been my
mm-hmm,
experience of teachers or my parents, and that the world is an unsafe place, right?
mm-hmm,
All of these can actually show up even in adulthood in terms of how I interact with the world, how I believe I'm okay. And a lot of my work is pinpointed on working in the here and now between the couple. What
mm-hmm,
is your dynamic right now? So we do focus a lot on the present and on the future. What is it that you're trying to create in the relationship? There's
mm-hmm,
definitely an aspect of it which is individual work from a psychotherapy perspective, which involves
mm-hmm,
going back into what are some of those limiting beliefs that you carry from your childhood. What are some of the things
right.
about your way of being that have nothing to do with your partner, that have actually been there
Mm-hmm,
since you were a little kid? And when
mm-hmm,
people begin to see that, it really has a couple of benefits. One is that if a person realizes their own patterns have been with them lifelong,
mm-hmm,
they realize that it's something that they need to work on and they cannot keep blaming their partner for it. And another
mm-hmm,
benefit of this is that when the partner is actually able to see this process of, their partner discovering more about themselves and their childhood patterns, then they
mm-hmm,
can learn to not take it personally. And they begin to
right,
even develop some empathy for the person. So, in the
right.
context of couples therapy, there is individual work touching upon people's histories also. Although I
Mm-hmm,
like to work a lot in the present and in the moment, in what's happening in the session
mm-hmm,
right now. Often I'll
mm-hmm,
also recommend that the people that I'm working with be in individual therapy. Because especially
right.
where I see that their past scripts are getting in their way, I have found it really accelerates the work if both the partners are in individual therapy with different therapists.
Right.
Yeah, so I would say that I'm biased, right? According to me, therapy is the way to do this kind of
Mm-hmm,
unpacking of one's own life script and making new decisions in the present. But I'm not also saying that it works for everybody. Therapy isn't accessible for everybody. And
right.
if someone isn't open to it, then there can be other ways. But they do all involve some willingness to go into the past, some willingness to sit with uncomfortable feelings, and taking out
Mm-hmm,
time to really self reflect, whether it's through reading or journaling or dream work. But it is
right.
work.
Right. You're talking of this modality where you're saying that, maybe it helps in some cases to work with individual therapists separate outside of the couples therapy. How does that work? Do the individual therapists then sort of share notes with you? Because um, it's possible that the individual therapist is taking them in a direction which may or may not be helpful
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
couples therapy as well.
Absolutely. So, firstly, there is a reason why I started actually training and working as a couples therapist. Originally, I didn't
Mm-hmm,
see myself doing that. Originally, I was an individual psychotherapist. But
mm-hmm,
first of all, I realized that about two-thirds of my clients were talking about their primary relationship as the primary issue in therapy, right?
mm-hmm,
And then I did some reading and found that when this happens, then there are some dangers because a therapist can become an echo chamber, just like a friend could, because they're only seeing one side of the story. right?
Right.
So it's
Right.
actually quite ethical for individual therapists to at least learn to take a systemic view, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some therapists do, but maybe some therapists don't. There's research that proves that therapists can make relationship undermining statements because they want to empathize with the person in front of them. They may end up
Right.
discounting the partner who's not there or diagnosing them or implying that the
Right.
relationship is completely unworkable. So there are some
Right.
downsides to individual therapy, although I love individual therapy and I practice it myself. So what I have found works really well, and I've tried all sorts of different modalities.
Mm-hmm.
There's one modality where I will be the couples therapist, but also work individually with each client. So I do have some clients like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is taxing a little bit on me because of the time that it takes, but it's great because I
Mm.
have a view on each person's inner
Right.
world as well as how they are as a couple. The other
Right.
modality is when each of these people have their own individual therapists. And there, what I have found works well is if they can be people who are willing to collaborate with me. Because you're right about the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it's very possible that there are three therapists and all are going in a different direction.
Right.
So I
Right.
often ask my clients if they already are in therapy to check with their individual therapists about speaking to me. And I say that maybe
Mm-hmm.
we'll end up speaking something like once in a month or once in 2 months. And it's all with the consent of
Mm-hmm.
the client. So nothing gets shared that the client is
Of
not
course.
comfortable with. I also have a
Right.
set of people who I work closely with. They are colleagues of mine. We have something called the Therapist Collective. So, what I have found
Mm-hmm.
works best actually is when this set of people is working individually with my clients, and then we
Mm-hmm.
have consent from the clients to collaborate on the case. So,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
that's a very very helpful way of working.
Yeah, that sounds intuitive because I guess you already have a trust equation with these people, and I guess it's the same for them. So that would um, work well. It just sounds like so much work, which I'm because I look at people around me, right, and you know how hectic our lives are. Unfortunately, especially people in the corporate world, it's just finding the time to slow down, reflect. I feel like even that is missing, right? You just don't have time to breathe. So then, sometimes you're rushing through the weekdays, and then on a weekend also you're making a lot of plans just to tell yourself that you've chilled, like you've earned your weekend. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the continuing themes of what I keep discussing in this podcast is that um, where is the time to not do anything and just be sit with your thoughts and just try and notice the direction in which your life is going and you're running. Do you see that with people in your practice as well?
I do, and there are I think two important things in what you said. Okay, so I want to address both of them separately. One is you've said a couple of times, this man, this sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of work. Okay, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Relationships are hard. Marriage is hard. This is again one of the things that people just don't tell you that this is going to be, really lifelong because people keep
Mm-hmm.
evolving, right? And everybody
Right.
is different. So and transitions happen, and during times of transition, like when we have a child, or when an elderly parent moves in, and one of
Mm-hmm.
the partners or both now are caregivers. These are all
Mm-hmm.
transitions. Menopause. Okay, I've seen people
Right.
really struggle with different transitions, and that has an impact
Mm-hmm.
on the relationship. So it's a lifelong process. Okay, but
Right.
I go back to the what is our idea of what a relationship is. If we think a
Mm-hmm.
relationship is there to make us happy, we're set
Mm.
up for a lot of disappointment. It's again the difference between happiness and eudaimonia, right? Which is actually you're here to be fulfilled and hopefully to grow as an individual, and you will be pushed constantly by your
Mm-hmm.
partner. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so and it is work. Again, in my book, I think I write
Yeah.
in the preface that you're going to be turned off by the use of the word work, but it is work. Yeah, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean we can't enjoy the process, but let's accept that this is
Right.
hard. Okay, that's the first
Yeah.
part. Coming to your question on time, it's absolutely
Mm-hmm.
an issue because I think the pace at which in the modern world, especially if you're in the corporate space, which we both have been,
Mm-hmm.
when you're living like that,
Yeah.
you often don't have time to slow down and even think, so much less actively connect with or slowly converse about important things with your partner. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually find that there's an irony over here, because in many such cases, people find that they have hours in the day to scroll or be on Netflix or, pursue their
Yeah.
hobbies, go for sports, spend time with the
Yeah.
kids. Okay. So
Mm-hmm.
somehow there's always time for everything except self reflection and work on the relationship. So I
Right.
don't really buy that anymore. And some of the ways that I
Yeah.
work with in couples therapy is I send people information about how, for example, Dr. John Gottman has done research which says that couples who actually invest at least 6 hours a week on their relationship. This could be
Mm-hmm.
in just spending quality time together or talking about the relationship or, just a date night or, just the way that they greet each other at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
how they part.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things add up. And these are little investments in the relationship which matter.
Right.
So
Right.
again, I find it ironic that this one relationship, which actually has such an impact on our health and our happiness, also research
Right.
proven, right? That it's the one thing that really determines the quality of our life, but we don't want to invest time in it. So I try to educate people on the importance of it. And in therapy,
Mm-hmm.
we also agree tasks. So, for example, it could be as simple as find 15 minutes in the day where you're just sitting together and enjoying each other's company. For some
Mm-hmm.
couples who are really distressed and who are fighting and haven't been talking to each other, even that can become a big, task. But it is
Mm-hmm.
important to spend that daily time. So,
Right.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it is work.
Yeah. No, it is. And I see this again. I watch a bunch of Netflix as well, and I'm scrolling on Instagram as well. And it's so true. I have a much more chilled out life, but people around me who are enmeshed into the corporate life, I just feel like it sometimes can be so exhausting that all you have energy left for is some mindless
Yeah,
numbing activities like scrolling
yeah,
or whatever. So I just feel like there's um I have lesser against things like sports, for example, because I feel like that's at least good for your soul and your body. But this getting distracted by your phone or your Netflix, I just feel like a, of course, it is the bane of the times, but b, also you just want to escape into something where you don't have to actively think. So I just think that that's unfortunately how
yeah. And
our lives have
look,
become.
I am not pretending that I am above, Instagram scrolling. I can get caught like everyone else. Okay? And
Yeah.
I watch Netflix, all of those things.
Yeah.
But and there's also a place for that sort of thing, right? It does make you
Yes,
unwind.
absolutely.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think the challenge is that many of these things, and I'll include sports or another hobby or a night out with the girls, I'll include all of that in the same bucket when it is being used to avoid the intensity of the relationship. When it is being
Yeah.
used to actually run away from problems that exist, which actually
Mm-hmm.
should be addressed head on. That's when it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a challenge.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
You mentioned time spent with the kids, for example. Another thing at my life stage that I notice is parents with young kids. Um, it looks like they are in extra trouble compared to the average, because obviously of the young kids, emotionally, logistical needs, and I've often seen that it becomes the woman who then is doing much of all of that. And um, it's possible that the husband sort of is a little removed from this entire ecosystem, and I find that these years can get quite traumatizing for the relationship between the husband and the wife. So do you notice this? What does your advice typically look like in
Yeah,
this
yeah,
scenario?
yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely see this as a phenomenon. There are a lot of people who, again, with the coming of a kid, they're like, what the hell happened? Okay. What's
Mm-hmm.
happened to my partner? They've changed. Okay. Because the
Yeah.
whole context of their life has changed. It's a very stressful
Mm-hmm.
time. There
Right.
is a research. I think it's called the parenting paradox. It shows that
Mm-hmm.
3 years after a kid comes, there's
Mm-hmm.
actually there's a significant drop in satisfaction for the parents. Okay, so it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Again, one of
Mm-hmm.
those things which are hard but meaningful, and definitely
Mm-hmm.
not always enjoyable in the moment. So that phase is hard,
Right.
and I find it ironic. And in the book, I have a chapter on parenting, and I write in that the irony of this is that these 3 years are also the most important and formative, going back to psychotherapy. Right?
Right.
These are the ones where
Right.
the child's brain is developing. We know 75% of the
Mm-hmm.
brain forms by the age of 3. So the stress
Mm-hmm.
between the parents does impact the child as well. And the stress arises on a couple of many different counts, but a couple of common themes I see is that it's absolutely true that, especially in our country, a lot of the times it is the
Mm.
woman who takes on the role of the primary caregiver, even if she's working.
Right.
Okay? So
Right.
that results often in a dynamic where she starts to feel really resentful. That, when the
Mm-hmm.
husband is actually doing something, it's considered help. Okay, so she's the
Mm.
primary caregiver, so anything he does is an extra, it's help. She
Right.
develops resentment on that account and she's exhausted, she's tired.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now
Mm-hmm.
what happens to their sex life during that time is also an issue. Okay, many people
Right.
will have the young child in the room with them, or the woman may be
Mm-hmm.
just too tired, or both of them may be too tired. They
Right.
have differences in the way they want to approach parenting. Okay, often one partner, it could be the husband, when the wife is taking more control, who feels left out, who feels powerless,
Mm-hmm.
and who even feels left out of the equation with the kids.
Right.
Because there is this concept of eroticism, which, when Esther Perel, who's one of the leading experts on relationships, she writes about it in
Mm-hmm.
her book called Mating in Captivity, that eroticism is not just about sex, it's about
Mm-hmm.
quality of playfulness and aliveness. And what happens
Right.
with mothers of young kids is that sometimes they get that in the context of just being with the kids and playing with the
Right.
kids and watching them grow, and
Right.
affection, that bonding, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Perel writes that eventually this eroticism, it has to be restored to the primary unit, which is the couple. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a
Mm-hmm.
phase which requires a lot of navigation. And I think, like with
Mm.
everything else, it boils down to the skills of differentiation. Really slowing
Mm-hmm.
down and talking about what your experience is and expressing yourself in a way that your partner can really hear you. Knowing
Mm-hmm.
your own thoughts, feelings, and desires and being able to say them. And then again, on the other side, when you're in the role of the listener, looking with curiosity and empathy at your partner's true experience. And this
Mm-hmm.
usually does not happen when you're in the middle of a fight and slinging mud at each other,
Of course.
or avoiding each other, or complaining to other people. So that's the
Right.
task of therapy, which is slow down and let's really talk about what's going on underneath the surface.
Right. Right. To me, it also sounds like I have a few friends who've just had babies, and it just sounds like while you're staying up nights trying to make sure that the baby is being fed is the worst time to try and do this work because you're so tired you can't think of anything else. So to me it almost sounds like one should prepare for this in advance, saying that this is going to happen. Let's start talking about
Ritu,
it.
I think everything should actually be done in advance, given what we now know. Or, this is what I was thinking originally. Before I wrote this book, I really wanted to do a marriage preparation workshop. Because for people
Mm-hmm.
who have decided that they're going to go ahead on this journey, if they even get
Mm-hmm.
some basic information about what is likely to happen and where they might trip up,
Right.
then I think it would
Right.
go a long way. But mostly
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
stumble through life and let things hit us. And then we find
Right.
that it's a lot tougher than we assumed it would be.
Yeah. And I don't know about Western families at all, but at least whatever I've seen in Indian families, it seems I don't know too many parents, too many people of my parents' generation who were great on communication. So it just seemed
Yeah.
like they were together.
Yeah. Mm,
So you've not seen anyone
yeah.
who's maybe there'll be a couple here and there who are probably great, and that too by chance. It almost seems like, but it's like these skills are absolutely non-existent. Like what? How do you know how to communicate without sounding defensive or without losing your mind. I mean, I have found myself like I lose my mind in a second. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. That's another thing that I calm down as well. But I'm just saying that quickly as well. But it's just so, yeah, I'm coming back to how hard it
It
seems.
is
And
hard, but
it's,
also there is something in
yeah,
what you're saying, because I feel like, you know, the generation that we are at right now, people who grew up in India in the 80s and 90s, right? There was no such thing as real emotional literacy or emotional
right,
communication, or, talking about your feelings and conscious
right,
parenting, conscious communication.
right.
These are not things that existed. So we have not grown up
Yeah,
like that.
right,
So, in a way, I think we can be kind to ourselves and say we didn't have those models and we didn't have that kind of parenting or that kind of
right.
experience in ourselves to naturally have these skills. And these skills
Hmm.
are much harder to learn as adults. Okay. But at the
Right.
same time, we're also exposed enough to know what modern parenting is supposed to look like. What are some of the
Yeah,
more conscious concepts and self awareness? And,
right.
we have social media throwing so much information at us.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that can put
yeah.
pressure on the opposite end, right?
Hmm.
So I actually think that it's very cool to aspire to want to be emotionally aware beings who are not passing on, the issues that we had to go through as kids to our kids.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there is a knowledge gap. And when it comes to even
yeah,
things like really solid communication around these things, solid information, I don't think it's there. I mean,
yeah,
Instagram
yeah.
can tell you everything in, a couple of bullet points, but
Pithy lines.
pithy
Yeah,
lines, witty lines, but really, like, for example, one that irritates me is if you're not horny or not healthy. I'm like, oh, really? So, does that take into account individual nuances? Does it take into account how our sex drive evolves over time as we age? With things like perimenopause, menopause, with things like the coming of a child, other hormonal changes, other life transitions. So that's just an example. But I think there's a
yeah,
lot of pressure on the one end that we put on ourselves. And if you're from the same generation, I think you are, which is that I will prove my worth by doing well. So then, self awareness and self analysis also becomes a project, right? So,
and a weaponized one at
yeah, yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
So
Especially when we
yeah.
diagnose our partners.
Oh
Yeah,
God.
I see a
Yeah.
lot of that.
Um. Yeah. No, I think what would be really helpful, Yash, and I'm going to call you Yash because Yashodhara is a mouthful, as is Rituparna. That maybe at the end of this, I'll put it in the show notes, some good resources that, people can look at, especially when it comes to just communication or navigating uh, marriage. Of course, I'll put the link to your book as well, because like you said, not everyone will have good access to a good therapist. I mean, I have had my fair share of working with therapists, because like I said, I have depression, and I think there's definitely a good therapist and a bad therapist, and sometimes you have to spend time shopping for one
Yeah,
that ends up being good. So I think anything that people can sort of read and self reflect would be quite helpful. I think. Now you mentioned this thing about sex, and if you're not horny, you're not healthy. Another thing that I sort of keep seeming to intuit as I sort of navigate people around me is that the way partners look at sex might be very different, right? So one partner might say that I want to be intimate in order to feel close. And the other person might say, I need to first feel close in order to go have sex. And they're very opposing sort of standpoints. Plus, on top of that, when you have the added trouble of you don't have time or you have a little young child, how do you navigate this log jam?
yeah. It is a pretty common impasse, this one,
Mm-hmm,
where one person is saying that I need emotional connection before I can feel like I want to have sex, and the other partner is saying
mm-hmm,
if I don't get sex, then I don't feel emotionally close. Okay?
right.
But usually there's a lot more going on underneath than just
Mm-hmm,
this surface level
yeah.
difference. First
Right.
of all, what happens is, since we all have different sex drives, inevitably in marriage, an issue that partners come up against when it comes to sex is desire discrepancy. One partner
Mm-hmm.
is a higher desire partner, and the other person is a lower desire partner. Okay.
Right.
Now, this is inevitable because, again, things also change, sex drives change over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the result of this is often a lot of frustration on the part of the higher desire partner and a lot of anger and
Right.
resentment. But
Right.
equally, there's also a lot of resentment on the other side, where the lower desire partner
Mm-hmm.
often feels pressured into sex. Okay, they feel
Right.
criticized. And underneath all of this, both partners are actually experiencing deep shame. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So whether it is desire discrepancy or whether it's this impasse about I want sex to be emotional, I want emotions to feel like I want sex with you, the idea is to do something which we ordinarily just don't do, which is to slow down and take turns to investigate what is really going on. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
one model that I like to use is called the dual control model. It basically encourages each partner to reflect on, for me, what is my accelerator when it comes to sex? What is my brake when it comes to sex? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and what are all the things, in other words, that actually turn me on and get me in the mood for sex, and what are all the
Mm-hmm.
things that turn me off, and how sensitive am I to these stimuli, how sensitive am I to these stimuli, right?
Mm-hmm.
And partners have never had this kind of detailed conversation before. So it's something I facilitate in
Right.
therapy, wherein a
Mm-hmm.
partner can take maybe a whole 90 minutes to really reflect on this issue. And when they
Mm-hmm.
do that, a few things emerge. One is they discover for themselves something that they didn't know before. Okay. They
Mm-hmm.
realize what is getting in their own way when it comes to sex. What are the stories that they may be carrying from childhood? What are some of the stimuli that they have noticed but haven't really actively talked about or thought about? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to share that with their partner. It's a very vulnerable, very intimate thing to do, right? And the
Yeah.
partner is also now able to see something they never saw before. They understand their partner
Right.
in a deeper way than they did before. And the task is for me to coach them to not take it personally and to really see that there
Mm-hmm.
is a different sexual template that this person comes from. And it's not a
Mm-hmm.
rejection of you, when
Yeah.
they like something or they don't like something. Even if they're giving you feedback, the idea is for you to see this is about them. So you don't take it personally. And then we reverse it.
Right.
Yeah, and we could
Mm-hmm.
spend several sessions talking about sex because sex is actually something people find most difficult to talk about. And it's so much
Yeah.
easier to, fight about household chores or, who didn't do that for the
Yeah.
kids. But the underlying
Right.
reason is often sex. So it
Right.
works both ways, that sexual dissatisfaction can lead to a lot of other problems, but a lot of other
Yeah.
problems outside of the bedroom can lead to issues in their sex life.
Right.
Yeah. So all of that is
Right.
something that we get to uncover in a non-judgmental way. And there's no one
Yeah.
solution. So there's no playbook which says, go ahead, try this method and you'll improve your sex life. It's a slow process,
Yeah.
very individual to each
Yeah.
couple.
Right. Right. No, and while you're talking about it, I also feel like again, as Indians, I have no concept of what it's like in Western societies, but there is deep shame associated with it, lot of taboos. So I don't think even partners feel super comfortable talking to each other about this stuff. And to me, from what you're saying, it first seems like just breaking down that barrier that one has to even talk about this openly. Like you're saying, somebody might not even be open to talk about the fact that they're sexually dissatisfied,
Yeah.
like as a starting point. So it just seems like, again, goes back to if you're spending enough time with your partner, if you're spending enough time with yourself to see what is the issue, and then really feeling, I hate to use the word, but brave enough
Mm.
to sit and talk about this topic, which unfortunately has so much
Yeah.
shame
Yeah.
associated
No, I think the word brave
with
is
it.
appropriate because it does take a lot of courage. It does mean
Mm,
taking a lot of risks. It is a vulnerable conversation to have, right? To talk about your
yeah.
desires, to talk about your sexual script, the messages you grew up with. And unfortunately, one message that many of us grew up with was it's not okay to talk about sex. You
Yeah.
It's ironic. I think I heard Esther Perel say in a podcast. She was describing it in the context of some Catholic woman, but essentially she said, sex is something which you never talk about, before you get married. And then after you get married, you never talk about it because it must automatically happen, right? So what's there to talk about? And I think it's very similar in our culture, right? So there's never really
Yeah,
been a window
absolutely.
to have a vocabulary around these things.
Right.
And I think it is true that partners not only may struggle to express to each other, but even to acknowledge for themselves just how dissatisfied they are, or what the actual problem is, or their own
Right.
shame or inhibitions. So,
Yeah.
how I try to counteract this in couples therapy is one, in my initial forms, I have found it's very useful to actually have a list of common issues that people fight about. And these issues are very universal. People fight about parenting, they fight about their in laws, they fight about sex, okay, and they fight about
Mm.
communication issues, okay, they fight about
Mm-hmm.
household chores, they fight about money,
Mm-hmm.
okay. Within
Right.
these six odd things, I think, a large number of issues are covered for the couple.
Mm. Mm.
So I
Mm.
think for people, the feedback I've gotten is that they get some comfort from even seeing that, oh, so you're telling me others also fight about these things. It's normal. And then it
Yeah.
gives them the window to be able to write in the form that at some point in therapy, I do want this to be addressed. And
Right.
it's very important for me not to push people before they're ready. Often I can be,
Yeah.
quite eager for them to address the core
Mm.
issue, but it takes time for them to get there and to be ready. So I have to also be patient and
Yeah.
let them take the lead.
In your practice, and I'm just getting curious now, do you see, we spoke about the fact that people might not acknowledge to themselves even that there are issues, but I can guess the kind of clientele you might have, and I guess I'm just getting curious. On an average, do you see people discussing this at least with their close friends?
The issue of sex in particular,
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say it varies. So, first of all, the kind of person who would come into couples therapy is a pretty evolved person. Okay, they think
Right.
in a particular way.
Yeah.
They have the money to spend on it. They have the time to spend on it. So, this set of audience, I have found, you could say, at least a significant percentage would be already discussing it either to their partner or to their friends. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
But having said that, there's also a significant chunk who really feels quite embarrassed about talking about it. And as they get
Yeah.
into it, they also begin to understand how much they have repressed for how long. So I'd say it's a
Yeah.
mix.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think I ever thought about it this way, but the work that you and people like you are doing, I think is so important because A, it affects individual happiness, B, it affects the happiness between the parent, and C, it affects, I think, the general family because I think when couples are navigating challenges amongst themselves, even if they're not loud, which is hard to do. But sometimes I think the thing that kids don't pick up. And my feeling is that that's not true at all. Even if you're not fighting, even if it is repressed, even if you're sulking silently, I just feel like even young kids pick up on the vibe of the room. So just this work that you're doing affects people at so many levels. I don't think um, I thought of it really of it being such a broad canvas.
Yeah, I think I've also learned on the way that because the couple is at the heart of the family system. Okay, now, of
Yeah,
course, the kids, but there are also others around them, right? There are
right.
parents who may be dependent on them. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's important to keep that heart beating strong, right? And on
yeah,
your point about the children, absolutely. Now, I have many individual therapy clients who've grown up with some story or the other about how they had to rescue one of their parents from the other.
yeah,
Yeah, so this is a
yeah.
very typical concept called the drama triangle, right? Where one parent becomes
Mm-hmm.
the persecutor and the other is the victim. And the child
Yeah,
actually unconsciously takes on the role of the rescuer. Okay, and none
yeah,
of these roles are healthy, and it really
yeah,
impacts children. And I'm actually often very skeptical, and I name it with the couples because I've had couples who say, "Oh, but our child is so good. He's so sensitive, or she's so understanding about the whole thing." I'm like, really? Your 10-year-old is being very sensitive and understanding about your fights. I mean, I think it's very important for me to hold up the mirror and get the couple to really reflect on what is
Hmm.
their child truly picking up, because they are sensitive.
Yeah.
They do pick up on the
Yeah.
hostility between the parents.
Yeah.
So absolutely, I feel very grateful that this work spills over into a
Yeah.
more nurturing and protective environment for the kids.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, while we're talking about this, I think I have heard these discussions, right, where you feel like the parents uh, are staying together for the kids
Mm.
because they think they're doing something nice for the kids by not separating. But in my experience, it can be equally bad where you're just, I think, on the surface together, but everything else inside is just so hostile that it can be equally painful. So again, this overall self reflection of um, what is going on here and whether the kid lets it on or not, the fact, getting the fact that the kid actually may not have the vocabulary for it but is able to sense something is deeply amiss, are things that again are not spoken of at all.
Yeah,
um,
and on this point, this is like a bit of a pet peeve of mine, this staying together for the kids. Okay, it's often said with a really, martyred sort of air. And
yeah.
I have a problem with that because, first of all, you know, I don't believe that all the research which is there in the West can directly apply here, but there isn't a lot of research
Hmm.
in India. So we can take some
Hmm.
cues, okay?
Right.
And in the US, there is research which proves that when parents are divorcing, it's not the fact of divorcing that actually impacts the well being of the kid. It's the amount of hostility between the parents. Okay.
Hmm.
So I do think that keeping kids in an environment where the family is together, but there's constant hostility and resentment and ugliness or fights at home, they can do a
Yeah.
lot of psychological damage to the kid.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
kid also picks up, and sometimes they are overtly told that I am in this relationship only for you. It
Yeah. Oh
becomes
my
a
god, that's
story
the
that they
worst.
grow up with, and the amount of guilt that then the kid, has to deal with
Yeah.
in later life.
Yeah.
Not to
Yeah.
mention that we all actually take a cue from the relational template between our parents. Okay, we end up replicating
Yeah.
it as adults. So it's not only our relationship with our parents, it's the relationship between the parents that we will find is getting mirrored in our adult life. So then what
Hmm.
you're essentially doing is you're setting up the kid with an unhealthy role model for how a relationship should be. So it
Mm.
really perpetuates a lot of problems. So I'm not advocating
Yeah.
leaving or divorce as a solution, but certainly this,
Yeah.
this air of I'm doing it for you, I think that that really needs to be looked at. Whose benefit is it really for?
Yeah. Yeah. I have also had some of these conversations, because you're talking about so much of the role of childhood. And I personally, I think I've experienced it myself. As I read about it, it seems fairly intuitive to me. But I've also had this line of conversation saying, yes, as a child, whatever has happened, you couldn't control it because you were a kid, and that's fair. And, blaming your childhood for how you're acting now is in some ways fatalistic, or saying that this is the script that I'm going to be stuck in, and almost giving excuses for your behavior now. um, and you one can only move forward, one can't keep going back to their childhood and what happened in the childhood, etc. What would you say to that?
I'd say it's one of the more unfortunate and untrue critiques of psychotherapy, which is that
Mm-hmm.
looking at the past means that you're justifying your way of being in the present, or that you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get stuck there. Okay. I have seen over and over that it's really about stepping back to observe what was, so that you can
Mm-hmm.
consciously decide in the present how you want your future to be different. So I don't think
Right.
psychotherapy is only about excavating and just archaeological digging of the past. It's really
Mm-hmm.
about examining how does that past show up today in the present and what do you want it to be. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a big difference between making excuses and justification as opposed to taking responsibility with awareness. So
Right.
I feel like that is the part which people miss when they outright dismiss therapy or looking at the past and say that, oh, how can everything boil down to your childhood? I mean, 75% brain
Yeah.
developed when you were three. So you make
Yeah.
decisions then which repeat over and over in your life. You have a
Yeah.
template and you live your life through the template until it is examined. Yeah, I think it's a quote
Mm-hmm.
by Carl Jung, right? Which is until you actually bring the unconscious to the conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's my take on it. But again, I'm biased. I'm a therapist.
I think this rolls very beautifully to, um, let's say there is a couple who are struggling, and one of them, it could be the man or the woman, is shut to therapy or says things like, I am too busy, or I don't believe in it, or what is this person going to do, or something of this sort. How would you advise them to proceed?
You know, I personally have found that I like to work with couples where both partners are actually motivated for change because, as we've
Mm-hmm.
established over and over in this conversation, this is hard work, right? So there are
Mm-hmm.
times when I have found myself working harder than the couple, and then I know there is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I know it's
Right.
time to step
Yeah.
back and regroup. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what is important is that people can advocate for therapy to their partner,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
dragging them into therapy is unlikely to work. Okay. Having said that, someone
Yeah.
could be quite
Yeah.
skeptical about the process until they actually begin to see that this is a
Mm.
structured space. Okay. I think one of the things in the course
Mhm.
that I follow that people seem to like is the structure. I find my
Mm.
work in couples therapy is a lot more structured than individual therapy, where I might let the client take the lead. Okay, in couples
Mhm.
therapy, I'm very clear about the fact that I'm the leader in the room. Okay, so I have
Right.
read their forms, I've done a pre assessment. We are talking about actual goals, we're talking about each partner taking
Mhm.
ownership of their own side of the street. Okay, we're talking
Mhm.
about actual tools and practical exercises and agreed homework practices. This is where some amount of motivation does get built because even the skeptical partner begins to see that, oh, this space is not a space where there are two people out to change me instead of one. Yeah.
Right.
This is a
Right.
place where
Right.
I and my partner both have to work. Okay.
Mm.
And then it's also very
Mm.
important. I find it helps when I am able to get people in touch with their actual vision for the relationship. Because how many times do you sit back
Mhm.
and think, oh, this is my vision for the relationship? Hardly ever, right?
Right.
But if you
No.
actually write it down and reflect on it, you get in touch with a lot of hope that you had at the start of the relationship. You get to examine
Right.
who you are now and what you really wanted to be. And that is another
Right.
source which can chip away at some skepticism.
Right. Right. Um, what do you think is the right time for seeking therapy? Is there such a thing?
Yeah, before marriage.
Whether or not, so you just said that in before marriage everything is rosy and hunky dory, and you're jumping into it, wondering why do I need therapy?
It is a paradox, isn't it? Because the time you might
Yeah.
benefit from it the most is the time when you think you need it the least. Because you say that,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
this what happened to me, but that's the other couples. That's the illusion of the bonding stage talking. Oh, you and me, we're perfect. But I really do think that there is some merit in the idea of preparing for marriage beforehand. I believe that in the Christian setup in churches there is actually some mandatory premarital
Oh
counseling,
yeah.
and
Yeah, yeah,
you have
yeah. I think
reported.
I've seen that in a movie.
Yeah, yeah, and it's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that something like a 3 hour workshop would be a great thing for couples who are about to get married or who are contemplating marriage to go through.
Right.
But okay, having said that, I think that the problems really begin to hit people in that couple of years into really living together. Okay,
Mm.
um, ideally they should actually address it early enough, and the reason for that is
Mhm.
that if they wait too long, their ways of being with each other become very entrenched. And we've seen
Right.
couples who can get stuck for not just years, but decades or even a whole lifetime in one pattern,
Yeah.
one way of being,
Yeah.
where they really
Yeah.
trigger each other. So, one very common cycle
Yeah.
is the criticism defensiveness cycle. So, one
Right.
partner is showing up as critical, and that's triggering the defensiveness in the other partner. That
Yeah.
defensiveness is exactly what is most triggering for this first partner who just really wants to be heard.
Yeah.
So, they get more loud and
Yeah.
more critical. This person gets more
Yeah.
defensive, runs away.
Yeah.
So this
Yeah.
is one
Yeah.
example of a cycle, and if it perpetuates for too long, it leads to so much distance, so much misunderstanding that
Right.
later on therapy does become difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the other thing as adults. And again, I think this is a problem of the Indian system. I got the amount of bashing that I'm doing is when you're kids, you're just being told, "Abhi padhai kar lo." You should 10th is important, 12th is important, engineering is important, MBA is important. Then you're done. But the reality of the matter is, uh, we are not really being set up for real learning. All of this is so academic, and it's almost like shown to you like a carrot that okay, kisi tarah you finish all of this and then you'll be done. And it almost sort of, I guess, in some ways lets you know that this is it when I stop learning, which is such a horrible thing to do. And as an adult, forget the Indian system, I guess as adults in general, it becomes quite difficult to move out of your grooves. You're just so set in your patterns. Your life script is so fixed that um, any sort of questioning it can seem like so much of a threat
Hmm.
to your whole being. So, again, what do you think one should do to keep themselves open and do self reflection? What have you found? Again, like I said, not everybody can maybe get to a good therapist. What are some self reflection uh, modalities, exercises, books? What advice would you have for people to slow down and just do this hard work?
Yeah, so one is I was thinking, even something like the school of life, okay, they
Mm-hmm.
essentially their tagline is an emotional education. So an
Mm-hmm.
emotional education is just completely missing from the way that we're actually brought up academically, right? So we
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
really walk into adulthood with the skills of, certainly not the skills of building relationships, right?
Yeah.
So it is therefore conscious work, but I would not say there's one way to do it. Okay, so I'll take the
Right.
example of myself and my husband. I really feel like we are very, very different personalities. Okay, so we've learned a lot, and in the book, I've actually used a lot of our personal stories also. So I've made myself
Right.
quite vulnerable and open. I'm not positioning myself as this
Mm-hmm.
one perfect expert who knows everything. So I've also talked about the
Mm-hmm.
mistakes I have made in my marriage and the learnings I have.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But because we're so different, our ways of learning has been different. So mine has been the
Mm-hmm.
route of really reflecting a lot, pursuing many, many different types of modalities around self healing. I'm a lifelong learner. I love to read. So I have like
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of books and, books, courses, training in psychotherapy. These are all my ways. Okay. But I have
Right.
found that my husband's way of growing has been very, very different. It could be as
Mm-hmm.
simple as contemplating. It could be as simple
Yeah.
as, throwing himself into the role that he wants to play in the marriage. It could be
Mm-hmm.
really just spending time by himself and experimenting with little things. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of growth can also happen without the books,
Yeah.
without the therapy. And I have come to
Yeah.
learn to respect that way of being and not impose it. And I think this is the issue.
Yeah.
One thing that I see as a problem in many couples is that one partner, I don't want to be sexist about it, but it is
Mm.
often the woman who will
Mm.
be the more proactive one, who will be, reading about therapy, who will be taking tests online. But
Mm-hmm.
when she begins to badger the husband about it, then it actually
Mm.
drives him further away from the idea of ever
Yeah.
really getting help. Because again, it turns into the
Right.
criticism and defensiveness cycle, which is why I
Right.
think some of
Right.
this knowledge that is available, that's when it does get weaponized. You know, she
Mm.
might send him a diagnosis saying, I figured you out, you know, you're a narcissist. And he'd be like, please stop sending me reels. So, so
Yeah.
there is no one way, and I think everybody learns
Yeah.
in their own way and own time, and that has
Yeah.
to be respected.
Yeah, I think it comes back to again these things that we've maybe spoken of earlier, which is differentiation, which is objective reality, and just there's just one ultimate way of figuring things out. But this has been really nice. Yes, this is everything that I had hoped for and more. So I've really enjoyed speaking to
Me
you.
too.
And yeah, like I said, maybe if you could share a couple of resources, I'll put that in the show notes, and
Sure,
hopefully this will be an interesting conversation for people to learn from.
sure, absolutely.
Thanks so much for tuning in. I look forward to your comments and feedback. Before you go, can I ask for a favor? If you like the show, would you consider subscribing? It's an easy way to support us, and we promise to keep doing what we're doing and try and do even better. Thank you.